Okay, so we are back, if I don't fall over here, and we are close to a test, which should be tomorrow. But we want to keep in mind that end in mind, which is I will be able to identify the theme by looking for repeated ideas in the story. So one of our questions on Tuesday, I think it was Tuesday, had to do with what evidence from the porcupine incident supports the theme of perseverance. This one really stands out to me, and you'll think, I normally don't go over questions in this format because last year I had kids that weren't answering questions and they would cheat and look at the videos and go back and submit. But this one really stands out to me as far as needing to really be discussed because it had to be done. He didn't have a choice but to pull those quills out. However, it took so much to keep doing it, even though he was in a tremendous amount of pain. If we think back to what perseverance means, it was not giving up. And he was not going to give up until he got those last ones out. I mean, he would stop, he would pull a couple, he would take a deep breath, he would keep going, even though it was probably pulling out little chunks of meat. He knew that he had to get all of that taken care of. So when I think about how it supported that theme of perseverance, he didn't give up. He just had to keep going. Now, the second question of that team talk was, what is the important lesson learned after he pulls out all the quills? I think this is probably one of the biggest questions of the book, and I think it's a really big life lesson, is that after he pulled out those last quills, he just cried. He got in a corner and he's like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And he had a good cry. There is nothing wrong with having a good cry. There's nothing wrong with feeling sorry for yourself in the moment. That is a very human emotion to feel. But what he says that he learned from that is that feeling sorry for yourself does not make anything better. It doesn't change anything. So after he had his good cry, after he felt sorry for himself, he realized that nothing changed. That if anything was going to happen or change, he was going to have to be the one to do that. That is a huge life lesson. We can all sit around and say, it ain't fair, it ain't fair, it ain't fair. My mama used to say, it's not a fair. For a fair, you buy a ticket. So nothing in life is truly fair. It's about how you work at it and what are you going to do. It's not fair that you didn't make the all-star team and you had better stats. My own brothers learned that. It's not fair that you don't get the job that you applied for, even though you're the most qualified applicant, and you are, but you didn't get the job and somebody's sister got the job because her brother works there. It's not fair. However, it's life. And then how do we go about saying, you know what, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm just going to pick myself up and see what I'm going to do. That's what Brian learned. He could sit there and bemoan about it all day long, but it ain't going to change the fact that he's in a cave in the middle of the wilderness, just got pummeled by a porcupine, had to pull the quills out of his leg, and it hurts like the devil, and it didn't change anything. So now what's he going to do? And then he had the realization through that dream that his hatchet made fire, sparks. And so now he's doing that repeated kind of thing again, like he did in the plane at the beginning. I'm alone, alone, alone in the plane. He's like, I'm going to make fire, fire, I'm going to make fire. So the author's leading us to believe that fire is next. And so that's kind of where we are for today. I want you to pick up your book, and we are going to go to chapter 9. Okay, so those two are finished. All right, so here we go. Brian found it was a long way from sparks to fire. Clearly, there had to be something for the sparks to ignite, some kind of tinder or kindling. But what? He brought some dried grass in and tapped sparks into it and watched them die. He tried small twigs, breaking them into little pieces, but that was worse than the grass. Then he tried a combination of the two, grass and twigs. Nothing. He had no trouble getting sparks, but the tiny bits of hot stone or metal, he couldn't tell which they were, just sputtered and died. He needed something finer, something soft and fine and fluffy to catch the bits of fire. Shredded paper would be nice, but he had no paper. So close, he said aloud, so close. Well, he put the hatchet back in his belt and went out of the shelter, limping on his sore leg. There had to be something, there had to be. Man had made fire. There had been fire for thousands, millions of years. There had to be a way, and he dug into his pockets and found the $20 bill in his wallet. Paper. Worthless paper out here, but if he could get a fire going. Well, he ripped the 20 into tiny pieces. Now, I know it's $20, but keep in mind, there's no Walmart, there's no store, there's nowhere to spend it. So money is paper. He ripped the 20 into tiny pieces, made a pile of pieces, and hit sparks into them. Nothing happened. They just wouldn't take the sparks. But there had to be a way, some way to do it. Not 20 feet to his right, leaning out over the water, were birches. And he stood looking at them for a full half-minute before they registered in his mind. They were a beautiful white with bark like clean, slightly speckled paper. Paper. Well, he moved to the trees where the bark was peeling from the trunk. It lifted in tiny tendrils, almost fluffs. Well, Brian plucked some of them loose, rolled them in his fingers. They seemed flammable, dry and nearly powdery. He pulled and twisted bits off the trees, packing them in one hand, while he picked them with the other, picking and gathering until he had a wad close to the size of a baseball. Then he went back into the shelter and arranged the ball of birch bark, peeling at the base of the black rock. As an afterthought, he threw in the remains of the $20 bill. He struck, and a stream of sparks fell into the bark and quickly died. But this time, one spark fell into the bark. Oh, but this time, one spark fell on one small hair of dry bark, almost a thread of bark, but seemed to glow a bit brighter before it died. The material had to be finer. There had to be a soft and incredibly fine nest for the sparks. I must make a home for the sparks, he thought. A perfect home, where they won't stay, they won't make fire. Well, he started ripping the bark, using his fingernails at first. And when that didn't work, he used the sharp edge of the hatchet, cutting the bark in thin slivers. Hair so fine they were almost not there. It was painstaking work, slow work, and he stayed with it for over 2 hours. Twice he stopped for a handful of berries and once to go to the lake for a drink, then back to work. The sun on his back until at last he had a ball of fluff as big as a grapefruit. Dry birch bark fluff. Well, he positioned his spark nest as he thought of it at the base of the rock, used his thumb to make a small depression in the middle, and slammed the base of the hatchet down across the black rock. A cloud of sparks rained down, most of them missing the nest, but some, perhaps 30 or so, hit in the depression, and of those 6 or 7, they found fuel and grew, smoldering, and caused the bark to take on the red glow. Then they went out. Close. He was close. And he repositioned the nest and made a new and smaller dent with his thumb and struck again. More sparks, a slight glow, then nothing. It's me, he thought. I'm doing something wrong. I do not know this. A cave dweller would have had a fire by now. A Cro-Magnon man would have a fire by now. But I don't know this. I don't know how to make fire. Maybe not enough sparks. Well, he settled the nest in place once more and hit the rock with a series of blows as fast as he could. The sparks flowed like a golden waterfall. At first, they seemed to take. There were many sparks that found life and took briefly, but they all died, starved. He leaned back. They are like me. They are starving. It wasn't quantity. There were plenty of sparks, but they needed more. I would kill, he thought suddenly, for a book of matches. Just one book, just one match. I would kill. What makes fire? He thought back to school, to all those science classes. Had he ever learned what made a fire? Did a teacher ever stand up and say, "This is what makes a fire"? He shook his head and tried to focus his thoughts. What did it take? Well, you have to have fuel, he thought, and he had that. The bark was fuel. Oxygen. There had to be air. He needed to add air. He had to fan on it, blow on it. Well, he made the nest ready again, held the hatchet backward, tensed, and struck 4 quick blows. Well, sparks came down, and he leaned forward as fast as he could and blew. Too hard. There was a bright, almost intense glow. Then it was gone. He'd blown it out. Another set of strikes, more sparks. He leaned and blew, but gently this time, holding back and aiming the stream of air from his mouth to hit the brightest spot. 5 or 6 sparks had fallen in a tight mass of bark hair, and Brian centered his efforts there. The sparks grew with his gentle breath. The red glow moved from the sparks themselves into the bark, moved and grew and became worms, glowing red worms, that crawled up the bark hairs and caught other threads of bark and grew until there was a pocket of red as big as a quarter, a glowing red coal of heat. And when he ran out of breath and he paused to inhale, the red ball suddenly burst into flames. "Fire!" he yelled. "I got fire! I've got it! I've got it! I've got it!" But the flames were thick and oily and burning fast, consuming the ball of bark as fast as if it were gasoline. He had to feed the flames, keep them going. Working as fast as he could, he carefully placed the dried grass and wood pieces he had tried at first on top of the bark and was gratified to see them take. But they would go fast. He needed more and more. He could not let the flames go out. Well, he ran from the shelter to the pines and started breaking off the low, dead small limbs. These he threw in the shelter, and he went back for more, threw those in and squatted to break and feed the hungry flames. When the small wood was going well, he went out and found larger wood and did not relax until that was going. And then he leaned back against the wood brace of his door, opening, and smiled. "I have a friend," he thought. "I have a friend now. It's a hungry friend, but a good one. I have a friend named Fire. Hello, Fire." Well, the curve of the rock back made an almost perfect drawing flue that carried the smoke up through the cracks of the roof but held the heat. If he kept the fire small, it would be perfect and would keep anything like the porcupine from coming through the door open. A friend and a guard, he thought. So much from a little spark. A friend and a guard from a tiny spark. He looked around and wished he had somebody to tell this thing to, this thing he had done. But there was nobody. Nothing but the trees and the sun and the breeze and the lake. Nobody. And he thought, rolling thoughts with the smoke curling up over his head and the smile still half on his face, he thought, I wonder what they're doing now. I wonder what my father is doing now. I wonder what my mother is doing now. And I wonder if she is with him. So if we think about how this chapter 9, how is it supporting that theme of perseverance? Oh my gosh, the whole chapter is supporting this theme of perseverance. You know, so let's think about it. Perseverance is not giving up. And Brian did not stop until he figured out how to get this fire going. So he started out with $20 bill and he shredded it all up. It didn't work. He had sticks. That didn't work. He went to the tree and he got the birch bark and he shredded it up really fine and he put that in there. And he tried that and that didn't work. And then he had to think about, what does fire need? And he thought about oxygen. And he blew on it and he blew the fire out. He didn't quit. He just kept playing with it until it caught. And then it was not enough that, okay, I made fire, but now it was like, oh, I got to get extra wood and I got to bring this in and I got to do that to keep the fire going. This whole chapter exemplifies perseverance to me with our character Brian. He is not giving up. Our end in mind is identifying the theme by looking for repeated ideas in the story. This chapter 9 is full of perseverance pieces, guys. And that is what we're looking for as far as textual evidence when a question asks you this particular thing. Now, when you get ready to break your questions down for today, one question, the very first question says, how do Brian's actions to keep the fire going provide evidence of the perseverance theme? That is totally different from him building the fire. So you're going to be finding that evidence probably in chapter 10 or 11. I'm not sure, but you will not find it in chapter 9. So be extremely careful here, okay? It's asking a different type of question. Number 2 says, besides providing heat, what are 2 other benefits of the fire? So think about that. A benefit is something gained from it. It's a good thing. So what are 2 good things other than heat that Brian gets from the fire? Number 3, what does the part where Brian sees the track in the sand tell you about him? And last but not least is, what is buried in the sand? What impact will this have on Brian? So that's a 2-part question. What is buried in the sand is one. The second one is, what impact will this have on Brian? Okay. So you are going to be reading page 89 through 94 to the bottom of the page. 89 through 94. So when you view assignments, it's going to tell you what to do with your questions and your simple solutions. And tomorrow is test day, guys. We're also getting close to a test in science. So I'll try to make sure that those don't run over each other. And we will go from there. So that is what we are doing. Trying to make sure. Yeah, I think that's it. All right. See you later.